Okay, and we are live, and this is a recording for Hour of the Wolf, and also staying on YouTube when all is said and done, in case you actually want to see us. Uh, and slating it today is Sunday, July 28th in the afternoon of the year 2024, and with me is Andrew Sayre. And I should say properly A.T. Sayre, because when you tried to get his new book, or even his debut novel, which came out some time ago, you'll need to know that name. Or yes, right. So the official bio, A.T. Sayre, Sayre, has been writing in some form or others ever since he was 10 years old. His work has appeared in the cosmic background Aurealis, Haven Speculative, Andromeda Spaceways, and most notably in Analog magazine, where his debut novel, The Last Days of Good People, was published in the July-August 2024 issue. That's pretty current, actually. His first short story collection, Signals in the Static, was published in May 2024 by Lethe Press. I know a lot of people say Lethe, but I know Steve Berman says Lethe, so shall I. A more detailed list of his work can be found at atsayre.com/fiction. Born in Kansas City, raised in New Hampshire, he lives in Brooklyn and likes to read in coffee houses, which is, I guess, very Parisian of you.
Well, all apart from not being in Paris.
Well, yeah, and I don't think I wouldn't want to be in Paris at this time with the Olympics.
No, it seems like it's probably a very full feeling city at the moment. I don't know. I've never really paid attention to the Olympics, but I do know enough to know it's actually in Paris at the moment.
Yeah, and well, I find them important because my question is, how many horrible things, and I'm not talking about the grand entrance and all that, are going to happen in Paris? They've had enough troubles in the last 3 or 4 years anyway, and they've already had, well, several major incidents, including people blocking up transportation. So the short story collection is just from the different places where you have published, right?
Yeah. It's. I think there's about 4 stories in there that weren't published anywhere, but most of it is like things I've had published in various magazines. 3 of them, I'm looking at the list right now. 3 of them, I believe, are from Analog. The story in Aurealis, which was the ambassadors. Various, but there's one story in here that I, in a fit of frustration with it continuously getting rejected, that I published on my own in Amazon on an Amazon Kindle, which turned out to be not as bad of an idea as it sounds, because nobody bought it. But yeah, it's basically just a collection. There's a few stories in this collection that I wrote back when I was like 19, and just did seriously taking out the really terrible teenage metaphors, but otherwise keeping them intact. But most of it is stuff that I've written in the last, say, 6 years or so.
Yeah. Well, I'm amazed. We've done no promotion that this event was going to happen, and we have 2 viewers already.
Wow. I didn't even tell my mom. So it's...
There you go.
I'm being stalked.
So, but what happens is when we go live, YouTube just puts up a little thing that says Jim Freund just went live, and I would expect the regular response to be a bit of cackling, but
well, you probably get a better response than I would ever get on my own.
I'm sorry, say again.
You probably get a better response than I would ever get on my own.
Maybe, but that's the radio, right?
Yeah.
As long as that lasts. On the other hand, I've never published anything.
Really? Not a,
Well, I have under pseudonyms. And the last one was in the late 70s
hmm.
and was in Galaxy magazine when Jim Bain was getting ready to leave Galaxy and going off to Ace Books and then Bain Books. And Jim was the editor. And he and Spider Robinson and I were the entire staff. And when they were short a certain word count for a given issue, Jim would say, Jim, I need 400 words. That's a short. They didn't say flash fic in those days.
Hmm.
And Spider would usually give me a shove in the swing. Like it was a dark and stormy night. And I sold enough to become a member of the Science Fiction Writers of America. Okay. But now I have a family membership with my partner.
Oh, so you can go vote for go vote for me in all the Nebula categories.
I can nominate and I can vote, and I do.
And I strongly encourage you to do so.
This year, more or less ignoring the Hugos, which were they last night?
No, they're not. Well, no, they happened during Worldcon, so that's going to be 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks, okay, right. And I haven't been following that too much. Last Worldcon I went to was the Millennial PhilCon.
I went to the one in Chicago. I obviously didn't go to China because I can't afford to go to China.
Right.
Obviously, I can't afford to go to Glasgow either. I'd love to go to Glasgow because I actually was in Glasgow when I was in college. I did 2 years abroad in England when I was in 2 semesters abroad in England, and one of the places I went was Glasgow for a weekend.
Yeah, I would love to see Glasgow. Barbara was there somewhere in the 80s.
Yeah, it's a nice city.
So I've heard. But we can't afford it, and there's too much happening in our life right now.
Yeah.
So, would you like to give us a sampling of short stories?
Sure. I got a brief bit about 10, 12 minutes worth that I could read from one of the stories in the collection.
Yeah.
This is going to be from the closing story in the collection, which is titled Across the River. It was published in Analog Magazine in, I believe, if not mistaken, 2022. It's a novelette. I'm not going to read the entire novelette. I'm just going to read the first couple thousand words of it. And it takes place in a sort of near third world, kind of run down area of a city that bears no resemblance whatsoever to Brooklyn. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and start reading this after I get a quick drink of water.
Yeah, you do that and pause whenever you feel like it. I am going to disappear, and when you are done reading, it takes the software about 15 seconds for me to reappear. But,
All right.
but I'll be around.
All right. So this is it's called Across the River. Jules Trovian MK8 stylus was completely toast by noon. Its final demise was sudden, right in the middle of adding an alabaster finish to some peripheral points of the design and tapping the buttons, furiously trying to revive it. They swirled the wand around inside the design in quick circles. Normally, that would have totally warped their output for the morning into a muddle of colors and abnormal shapes. But now, nothing. They held the wand up close to their face. The little blue LED light just below their thumb flickered, and after a few seconds went out completely. Jules dropped the wand onto the table and rubbed their face. This was not exactly a surprise. The wand had been getting wonky the last couple of weeks, losing its deft feel and touch, needing multiple clicks to adjust a color or line, much retracing, more frequent reboots. But the work didn't as much suffer from all that as it just made it take a little longer. Which wasn't all bad. The extra time for deliberation made Jules more thoughtful in what they were doing. But now the wand was completely dead. Jules slipped the wand receptor out of the neural dock in their neck and dropped it onto the desk. It clattered and bounced around like dye before settling near the defunct wand against the side of their ashtray. They leaned back in their seat. The corner of the sheet over the window had fallen out again, and a shaft of light hit them right in the face. They closed their eyes and let the light warm their cheek. Jules had hoped the wand would make it through the Emerson project. It almost had. Most of the holoscopes were done. The ones still left were the smaller escalator ads, a pad pop-up or two, which were just slight variations on the pedestrian bumps for concourse areas anyway. A slight different framing, a heavier tint to compensate for the lower res, and a shorter pattern cycle, 10 seconds instead of 30. All told, a week's worth of work at best. Easily meeting their deadline with a day or so to spare. With a functioning wand. Jules grabbed a half-smoked, dried-out spliff from the ashtray and sniffed it. They placed it in the corner of their mouth and chewed on it, unlit, shaking their head. Jules never missed a deadline. They couldn't afford to. The producers, the company owners, the money folks, they could screw around or set ridiculously absurd goals for their part on a project. And when they flew by unmet, they just shrug and set another. But not the help. Finish a gig late, even just once, and suddenly you're unreliable. Miss a deadline because your equipment crapped out and you're unreliable and out of date. And good luck trying to find your next job with that rep. Jules rubbed her nose and sniffed. Maybe that was being a little hyperbolic. Maybe. But not as much as they were comfortable with. These design houses, they have no loyalty to a freelancer. There is always someone else they could bring in for the next job. Someone who always met their deadline. There was no other option. Jules needed to get a new wand today. It was cold and damp out, not quite raining yet, but feeling like it was only a matter of time. The faint mist in the air splashed on Jules' cheeks like microscopic ice and sharpened their senses. They pulled their coat tightly around themselves and hustled down the road, stepping around the trash bags that the squatters in the half-standing building next door had put out a day early. A mangy little dog that was rooting through the bags looked up at Jules and growled as they passed, protective of some newfound treasure inside the garbage. The weather had thinned the market crowd a bit, but it was still fairly active as Jules entered, ducking under the string of LED lights that sagged across the entrance, flickering softly in the uncertainty of being just barely too bright to fully turn on. One of the panhandlers that loitered out front approached them. Jules held out both their hands apologetically, and the man turned away with a slight nod of his head. Jules continued past the craft tables and makeshift stalls that baked goods and homemade candy huddled underneath tarps to keep from getting ruined in the rain. A sudden stomach growl made them remember they had forgotten to eat today. Jules turned off the path to cut across the center of the market where the dirt and grass had only barely started to bury the concrete mold, making for the cargo containers at the far end of the market. 3 of them rested against the side of an old parking garage, with doors and windows cut into their sides and random colorful graffiti in between the opening. These were the more permanent residents of the market, places with more craft jewelry or homemade baked goods. On one end, there was a bookstore where the couple who ran it were busy pulling in their outside displays. In the middle was a bar that had a smaller container stacked on top, creating a second-floor balcony setup. The bar was so closed, with metal shutters covering the door and the windows, just as Gorky's electronic shop inexplicably was the other side of it. Jules stopped and stared at its place with a scowl. They approached the shop and rapped their knuckles on the shutter loudly a couple of times. After a few moments, they heard someone moving around inside the store, something getting knocked over, followed by muffled swearing. Then, "We're closed," came the hoarse cackle through the door and shutter. Jules pressed their face right up to the side of the shutter. "Gorky, it's me," they shouted back. "Let me in." 2 hands gripped the bottom of the shutter and lifted it with a screech. Jules stepped back as Gorky's old, grizzled head stuck out from the dark shop and eyed them. "We're still closed," he said. "Come on, it's an emergency," Jules pleaded. "I'm on a deadline." "When are you not?" The old man sighed and stepped aside, swinging the doors open for Jules. "Make it fast." The shop was dark with shutters still over the windows, but not pitch black. The neck of the lamp by the small table near the door was turned upside down and reflected off the shiny ceiling, sending long shadows over the stacked bins of random electrical equipment along the back wall. On the table next to the lamp was a multi-level schematic spun slowly over a hollow pad. "Looks like it's almost done," Jules said, nodding at the display. "Got my hands on some octa-core processors. Should cut the time breaking through the encryption by half." Gorky walked past Jules and dropped a kerchief over the base of the display, and the display blinked out. "If I can find the time to work them into the design." Jules nodded. "Right, fine." They cleared their throat. "My wand just crapped out on me, and I need a new one." Gorky smirked. "New? New to me." "That I have." Gorky walked over to a glass display case and flipped a switch on its side, lighting up the case. Inside were various electronic items spread out over 2 rows of shelves. In the upper right corner were a collection of 5 wands, resting haphazardly on top of their boxes. Jules walked up to the case and leaned down to look at the wands. After a few moments, they looked up at Gorky, leaning on the case opposite them. "These all you have?" they asked. Gorky gestured around the store. "It's not like I have a back room here." Jules straightened up with a sigh. "They're all prosumer at best." Gorky took out a wand from the end of the rest and rested on the top of the case. "What about this one, the Maxwell ER5? Has all the functionality of the higher-end models." Jules picked up the wand and rolled it over in their hand, looking it over. They shook their head and put it back down. "I've tried them before. It's not terrible, but it's sluggish. It's got a slow processor, and the color palette is too narrow. You end up spending half your time mixing and blending just to get the shades you want." Gorky scratched his chin and returned the wand to its spot under the glass. As he did, he pointed to the one next to it. "What about the Tokugawa Series 12? Better processor, but less control. It has only 2 single press buttons instead of a directional switch and a thumb wheel. And they're not even tactile." Jules tapped the glass above the other wands in turn. "Same goes for the Triboulet, the Yellen, and the Inokin." They straightened up with a sigh. "I was really hoping you'd have a Trovian, MK7 or better." Gorky chuckled. "I don't carry high-end stuff like that." "You have before." "Only when it fell in my lap. Even then, they usually just take up space. Nobody around here has any need for something like that." Jules wrapped their knuckles on the glass case. "I do." "Obviously." Gorky threw up his hands. "Well, if you want, I can order one for you, rush the delivery, and it'd get here by tomorrow evening. Day after at the latest." "I could have done that from home." "Even assuming there'd be no delay on the delivery, which I don't, it'd still take too long, and I'd miss my deadline." "Then get the Maxwell to use until you can get a Trovian." "I can't afford 2 wands. Even after I get paid on the job I'm on, whatever I get now, I'm stuck with for a while." "Get one on credit." "Do you take credit?" "I meant get the Maxwell now and order the Trovian online with credit." Jules snorted. "Sounds so simple when you put it like that. I suppose you'll let me return the Maxwell for a refund." Gorky smirked again. "Then what?" Jules stared down at the case for a long moment before they shrugged. "I'll have to go into the city." "You thinking Ajax?" "They're more audio. I was thinking H&I Uptown. Guaranteed they'd have one." "Yeah, but Uptown," Gorky said with a grimace. "That's no place for decent humans." "I know," Jules sighed. "That's why I stopped in here first, to see if I could avoid it." They stood straight and started to turn towards the door. "I was hoping to not have to make a whole damn day of this." Back outside, many of the stalls were empty or in the process of being packed up, the sellers having decided to go home and wait for tomorrow and hopefully better weather. Some were still braving it, though. Jules stopped and grabbed a banana muffin from one of them on the way out to the market and ate it as they walked to the train. After the last bite, they rolled up the cellophane and paper into a ball and deposited it into the overfilled trash bin on the corner, gingerly placing it on top so it wouldn't fall onto the ground. As they wiped their hands together over the bin, Jules looked down the street to the left. It sloped downward sharply and leveled out a few blocks away. They could see all the way to the river, and then to the faded brick buildings on this shore to the blue and silvery skyscraper shooting upwards on the other. So bright and gleaming. Flashy reflections of candy-colored lights faintly sparkled in millions of windows. Even the air around those structures was brighter. Despite the cold and miserable weather and the ominous clouds above, it was just another sunny day in the city. Naturally. They'd never let it rain uptown during business hours. So ends the reading.
So now I didn't see a countdown.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Was I supposed to?
you usually when I put myself back
Oh,
in,
okay.
yeah,
So that's my story. That is about a freelancer who lives in the rundown part of town that bears no resemblance to Brooklyn, that needs to go into the high-end, rich, fancy colors, bright lights, and sell it in hyper capitalism that is in no way the Upper East Side.
okay.
Absolutely no.
And what inspired the story?
Being a freelancer in Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
I don't know. It's kind of right around when I was writing the stories when I got my previous computer finally crapped out on me, and I needed to get a new one, but I needed to get one that I could use remotely, because this is right when the pandemic was just about waning away. Well,
Mhm.
it's not gone, but it's not like it was when we all couldn't leave the house.
Yeah, it's not lockdown anymore.
So remote working became more of a thing, and the computer I had at the time was not capable of handling remote work for the video editing that I'd be doing. So I needed to get a new one, and I could, I really couldn't afford a new computer. So I suppose that might have had a little bit of an inspiration as to basically getting this computer that when I'm working professionally is exactly what I need. But like 80% of the time, I'm not all the time I'm not working. It's like kind of ridiculous that it's way too powerful just to be watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's some of that. There's sort of considering yourself sort of like, I suppose I consider myself sort of like not part of the whole, popular culture zeitgeist or however you want to call it. And yet a lot of times I'm working, like the last job I had, I was I was one of the people helping to put together a bunch of car commercials for Ford. I've done stuff for Stouffer's Pizza. He's working on ad campaigns when I'm consider myself above, the capitalists, I suppose, or however you want to put it. And I suppose that's probably one of the main influences of what the stories, if I had to point to anything, just sort of the thoughts and feelings that go through your head when you're working on corporate and advertising campaigns, and you feel you're beyond that or above that kind of thing.
Now, pardon me, what is it that you do in, saying you're a freelancer is one thing, and you've told us now that it's corporate, but what is it you do?
I do to pay the bills, to make ends meet. I do freelance video post production,
Okay.
which is basically video editing. Usually at the level of the advertising campaigns, I'm an assistant editor, which is I'm there mostly just to do the things that the editor thinks is beneath them or is too busy to do. Like if they need like 40 clips of a family playing in their backyard, I'm the person who goes finds the clips and puts them into the editing software.
Okay.
It's basically organizer.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's cool stuff. I do audio post production for not for Skyboat Media. I work with Skyboat Media, but for Adamant Press, which is John Joseph Adams' group of magazines.
Yeah,
Which
I'm very familiar. I try to read. I read whatever Lightspeed science fiction story they put out every week.
yeah, but do you listen to the podcast?
Honestly, I'm not really big into listening to like podcasts or like I don't really get into like listening to people read stories unless I'm listening to them read them in person. I like going to readings. I just don't really care for like audiobooks. It's not my thing.
Yeah, but well, we're proud of the podcast. One, two Hugos, and I'm the host.
Hey, I know I have nothing against
For
podcasts.
Lightspeed, and not that's it. and Fantasy Magazine no longer exists.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, that was taken out of the slate.
that was just a few months ago, right?
Um, well, more than a few months, but
Okay.
less than a year.
Yeah.
And about the beginning of this year, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not big on fantasy. I mean, I have read fantasy and I do read fantasy. Like, if a friend of mine in this thing of ours writes a fantasy story, I will read it. Uh, but as far as like regularly going to like the fantasy magazines, it's not really. I'm more about the science fiction, and
Mhm.
magical realism is more my thing.
Yeah,
Um, it's not where my head is at usually. Only I
yeah.
again if a friend of mine writes something and I hear about it, I'll read it. I'll go out of my way to read it because friends. But just general fantasy, I'm just not really my thing.
Now, are you currently in any specific writers group?
I am involved with the Brooklyn Speculative Fiction Writers Association. I'm uh, a couple of things here and there, a couple of writing critique groups. One with Barbara that I'm also that also periodically gets together and tells each other how terrible we write it. No, periodically gets together and helps work on everybody's stories. Um, I'm in the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association, and there's another Codex. I go to I'm fairly involved with going to Codex as well, which is a sort of professional writers group. Um, yeah, but other than that, it's mostly just me in my bedroom. I just kind of like sitting here all day. I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not much of a joiner. I am a member of things, but sometimes it's barely more than just paying the dues.
Hmm. Uh, do you follow any media science fiction?
As far as like periodicals,
No, media would refer to television, movies,
uh,
stage.
oh, like you talking about my favorite TV shows and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've probably for the last 10 years rewatched Farscape once a year.
Ugh.
Ew, what's wrong with you? It's one of the better.
Farscape?
Farscape,
Not my
awesome.
favorite show.
Farscape is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's a hot mess, but it's such a beautifully hot mess.
Yeah, no, was never my thing.
Oh well.
Uh,
I mean, The Expanse is another one I like a lot. The
I
Prisoner.
like. I watched the first season of The Expanse, and for some reason, I never picked up on it again. I have read the books that it's based on.
Yeah, I read the first one. I haven't actually found the other ones yet. I'm more of a short story reader, so reading novels it takes an special situation because usually one of the things about being a freelancer is I never know when I'm going to be like called on to be like, oh, I'm going to be working 50 hours a week for the next 3 weeks, and I'm always worried I'll get that'll happen like where I'm right in the middle of a novel and I'm not able to get back to it for 3 weeks. So I generally stick with reading things I could finish in an afternoon.
Okay, fair enough. I have a phone, a tiny little phone that I can always move from my computer when my computer is working, and then pick it up on the phone.
Yeah, I mean, I have that too. It's just
And occasionally, I actually read a book over.
I got a bookshelf behind me. You can see.
Yeah, I see that.
You can't
I
really. I
can't.
mean, the only book you can really tell is like. Let me see. How do I point? Trying to figure out how I point here. Now, whatever. The only one you can actually see up there that you can recognize from this view is probably Murakami's IQ 84, which I bet
Mhm.
if you look carefully enough, you could probably spot on my bookshelf.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think the resolution. I'm using a laptop at the
Yeah.
moment,
Well, I
and the
mean,
resolution
I
isn't.
I mean, it's my bookshelf, so I recognize a bunch more of them. Like I see where my copy of Cavalier and Clay is right next to uh, the book he wrote that takes place is sort of I guess that's speculative fiction that takes place in a alternate history Alaska, where that became instead of Israel. If I remember the book right, that instead of Israel, Jews resettled in Alaska. I can't remember the name of that book. I'm looking right at it, but I can't. Whatever. And I can see my copy of Russell Banks's Cloud Splitter there too. But That's something you're not going to be able to know unless you actually know my bookshelf.
Anything in particular that you recommend?
As far as reading,
Yeah.
probably about 80% of what's back there.
Okay.
They're all good, but I don't keep bad books. I mean, as far as like speculative fiction go, obviously my favorite is probably still Harlan Ellison. Probably will always be that. Obviously, I like Ray Bradbury. I've liked Ray Bradbury since I was about 9. Philip K. Dick. This is embarrassing, but I feel, in full disclosure, I should admit this. I never read Philip K. Dick until I was in my 20s. And the reason I never read him he was around. His books are around with all the other stuff I was finding. I never read Philip K. Dick because I was certain that the reason he was popular is because people like to snicker at his name.
Yeah, no, he's.
I know. It's not.
As you know by now.
I know it's not true. I've read.
Often a great writer, sometimes a poor writer.
His novels are great. His short stories sometimes leave a lot to be desired. He's one of the rare occasions. I usually prefer a writer's short stories. I think the short stories are usually better than the novels. Philip K. Dick is one of the rare occasions where I think his novels are infinitely better than his short stories. But I mean, I learned my lesson. I mean, after when I first read the first one, I was like, okay, I was wrong about that. And I think I've pretty much read every Philip K. Dick novel there is. And
Yeah.
I believe I have all of them on the bookshelf. You can't actually, it's the top of the bookshelf. It's on the first row.
Which is your favorite?
My favorite Philip K. Dick novel?
Yes.
I
have a favorite, and I have what I consider is best.
It's hard to say. I mean, I could narrow it down to maybe 3 or so.
Okay.
The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch,
which I just reread.
Yeah, I think I reread it like about a year or so. I'm about due to reread something by Philip K. Dick. Scanner Darkly.
Yeah.
And I know the popular choices would be to say Man in the High Castle, but I think I actually have to go for Maze of Death.
Yes. A viewer.
Yes, that's it.
Under a pseudonym is saying the Yiddish Policemen's Union is the one about Jews in Alaska.
Yes, that's it. I can. You probably can't tell. You probably can't see it. I can see it. I know where it is on my bookshelf, so I can see it. But you probably can't see it because you don't know my bookshelf that well, or if you do,
right, but I just picked up on that particular book.
It's a good book.
Yeah, it is.
I like his writing. I like Chabon's writing a lot. I've read 3 of his novels. I know he has many more, but I've read 3 of them, and I like his writing. Oh, there's another book. I can see another book that I can actually spot from looking at myself. My line of Thomas Pynchon novels, which I've actually read all but one of his books.
Wow!
But I've only read all of his books once, and I'm never going back.
No, those are, along with Dahlgren and some other things, those are big books to tackle.
I've wanted to read Dahlgren, but I read Babel 18 and just didn't get into it. I think Dahlgren's probably my next big thing I'm going to read. But Pynchon, I love Pynchon. Pynchon has absolutely no regard whatsoever whether you actually know what he's saying or not. He does not care whether you're following what he's writing at all. And quite often when I'm reading one of his books, I don't really know what the hell's going on. Like for a good 100 pages, I don't know what's going on. But he writes so well, I don't care.
Yeah, you might find a comparison to that and Delaney. He does get that deep, and he does things like plays around with where the text is going, marginalia, all kinds of things that he loves to throw in. And to an extent, I would actually compare the two.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've read Delaney before. I mean, like I said, I read Babel 18. I've read, I can't remember the name of the one he had in Dangerous Visions. I've read that one, obviously, too. Was his I and Gomorrah, was that his?
Yes.
Okay, I read that. And a few of his other stories here and there.
Yeah, but Dahlgren is an 800 or 900 page novel and is extremely complex.
No, I don't mind complexity. I enjoy complexity. I mean, it keeps your mind engaged.
Yeah, it does. But it's also what people would call new age writing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Of course,
Anyhow, my favorite Philip K. Dick is Ubik.
the first in the trilogy.
Don't know that it's part of any trilogy.
Well, he had that
Ubik.
trilogy with a beam of light. He actually he's a character in the book named Horselover Fat.
Yes, no, that's not Ubik.
Okay, that's not Ubik.
Although I do like that trilogy, and it's not strictly a trilogy. That's the Valis
Oh,
trilogy.
okay, yeah, Valis, the Divine Invasion,
VALIS.
and okay, which one is Ubik?
It's a standalone, and you almost can't describe it without giving away a major reveal about what reality it occurs in. It's pretty early, as in like, well, 60 something,
Yeah,
1960 something. And that's my favorite. Hardly is best, but I enjoy it a lot.
yeah.
The
I
best
suppose
I would
most
have
people are
to
going to
say,
say like Man in the High Castle is his best,
yes,
and it's
yes,
good. I mean, it's a great novel. I mean, no question.
yes.
I
I
mean,
was very disappointed by the TV series.
yeah, the TV series. I don't know. That has about as much. That TV series. I mean, it's weird because the TV series until that last few episodes of the final season was not bad. It was fairly decent. It wasn't Philip K. Dick. You know
Right. Yeah.
that to Philip K. Dick is like me to Andre the Giant. They're really not that similar. And there was another one that Amazon did it twice to Philip K. Dick. They did like an anthology series of what they
Yes.
claimed that was even that had even less to do with Philip. They had a story in there that they thought was named after one of my favorite Philip K. Dick short stories, Foster Your Dead, where it's about
Yeah.
consumerism, like people like competing to get the best fallout shelter. And there's one kid that doesn't want anything to do with it, and it's like his fights with capitalism and consumerism. It's a brilliant little story. And they did a version that was like, you can't even call this based on that. You are so far off. I don't even think you kept the characters' names the same, but you're still making the claim to it, which I thought was ridiculous because you weren't that close.
Well, Man in the High Castle, they killed off the lead character on TV.
And they weren't going. It was not the same idea at all. I mean, Man in the High Castle, when it really comes down to it, is about the difference between fake and reality, the genuine article.
Yeah, well, that's much of what Dick is about. Period.
Yeah, I mean, he has a brilliant little moment with the guy who owns the antique shop. And he's talking to his mistress in bed about this lighter that he said Franklin Roosevelt had this lighter in his pocket when he was assassinating. He's like, well, how do you know? Because I have the pamphlet here saying it was. I mean, that's basically Man in a High Castle in a nutshell. It's like what's real, and all he has like I can't remember. I can't think of the exact word for it. Like the bona fides for it, proving that it's real, which is basically just a sheet of paper saying, "Yep, it's real." That's his only proof that the lighter that he had is the one Roosevelt was holding when he was assassinated in Detroit.
But as we get to the latter part of the Man in the High Castle, we discover there are existing alternate realities.
Yeah.
And
the thing I love, the other thing you notice about that, of course, I'm sure you've noticed it too. What Dick makes fairly clear, he's saying is the actual real reality isn't ours either.
Right.
Which I thought I love. That's a beautiful little touch.
Yeah, and that's one of his two main themes, along with what is the authentic human being.
Mm-hmm. But again, the TV show didn't really dive into that at all.
No, and I wouldn't say that that's in the book either. It's just those are his two main themes. But anyway, let's see. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Ooh, how time flies.
It does. It does. We've been recording for 39 minutes and change.
Okay. So, all right. Well, I just liked the book is the Signals and the Static. I'm quite proud of most of these stories.
Who's the publisher?
Lethe
Oh, yes.
Lethe Press. You can get it on their website. and you can get a link to it on my website at the atsayre.com/fiction. Some of the best things ever written are in this short story collection. The one I read from is one of my favorite stories, even though it's a low stakes story, but it's, I think, a beautifully written low stakes story, if I do say so myself. And then there's my first novel, which mentioned earlier, that is in the current issue of Analog, which should not be the current issue of Analog in about 2 weeks. The Last Days of Good People. It's a novel I accidentally wrote during the pandemic because it was only supposed to be about 20,000 words long, but I couldn't stop going. Is also going to be coming out as an audiobook and an ebook in early next year. The audiobook will be from Dreamscape, and the ebook and print on demand will be from Jabberwocky.
Very good.
Yes. It's a very good novel. Everybody seems to like it very much.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on trying to force myself to write anything at the moment. I'm at this every once in a while. It seems like this happens every year, but right now I'm going through a period where I sit down, I open up Scrivener, I look at the current thing, whatever I'm thinking and working on. I look at the paragraphs. It's like, man, I don't even like this font. I'm having. It's a struggle. Like if I'm lucky right now, when I sit down to work on something, I'm lucky if I get like 150, 200 words down in a whole day. It's just one of those things that happens. I mean, it's kind of a novella I'm working on, but I can't talk about it because I can't talk about anything I'm working on because
that's actually an answer to that question that I frequently get from writers. It's just, I may talk about the book after the one I'm working on now, or story after, but they can't talk about something in progress.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can't tell you. I get through that first draft. I'll talk your ear off about it I'll talk your ear off about a story for 2 hours if I can. After that first draft. But until I get through that first rough draft, I cannot tell you a thing about it. I'm even nervous that I told you it was a novella. It's intended to be a novella. I'm worried that's too much.
Yeah, well, you never know. That and also, as has happened to a lot of writers, that's something that can change.
You mean as far as people being able to
the length of what they're working on? All of a sudden, such and such turned into a novel.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, that's what happened with the Analog story. The one that's in Analog right now. The version they have is 55,000 words long. So even though it says in the table of contents it's a novella, it is actually a novel. But I started writing that during the pandemic, and I was like, oh, this is that's a pretty good idea. This can be about 20,000 words long. Then I blew past 20,000 words. I was okay. It's going to be
a lot
about.
of writers had two reactions to the pandemic. One was to immediately get a case of writer's block, and the other was to start writing everything. But they discovered frequently that what they were writing during the pandemic had a very different tone.
Well, I don't know if what I wrote had a different tone. It was it'd be impossible for me to say it's not a little bit pandemic influenced as far as content.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I was just making a remark since I interview enough writers.
It's funny because if you had told me before actually the pandemic, before I even sat down and wrote the novel, I would have told you I'm never going to write a novel because I don't have any ideas that are good enough for a novel or any ideas that are extensive enough for a novel.
Yeah. So you never know.
Well, it's basically someone like me. I mean, I'm the guy who has written people 100-word texts. So I don't think I should ever underestimate how verbose I could get.
Yeah.
It's some people will tell you that, I just had a lot to say, but people know me say it's like, you just didn't know how to shut up.
Okay, so this is our 1-minute warning.
Okay.
And because we've been recording for almost 45 minutes, and while Hour of the Wolf is now a prime time show, it's a It's been cut down to 1 hour. When you were on, was it a midnight show?
It was a late night show last time I was on. That was I think 2020. Right before, actually, one of the stories in the short story collection I read the last time I was on, The Big Day.
Right, right.
And
But did Hour of the Wolf start at midnight?
started late, certainly started late. I remember.
Yeah, I mean, I was for many years. I was 5 to 7 a.m.
Well,
That's
it wasn't 5. Pretty sure it wasn't 5 to
no,
7.
I know that.
It was late. It was.
But for a while after that, I was bounced around from one place to another. But I got moved about 3 years ago to Mondays at 9. I'm very pleased with it. And we'll see what happens. We have a new program director. Who knows? But we'll be here on YouTube regardless.
Yep. Everybody's on YouTube. I even, I actually have a couple of trailers I edited for practice on YouTube.
Really?
Yeah. This is a funny thing is I did one for The Thin Blue Line, the Errol Morris documentary from a few years ago.
Yeah.
I did one for that. It has over 500,000 views.
Wow. That's impressive.
It's only because the Errol Morris, it was a PBS program, so they never actually made a trailer for it. So they basically just, anybody who wants a trailer for that movie, whenever they're referencing it, they end up using the one I made. It's funny.
Cool. Now we are over time, I'm sorry to say.
Okay.
So this is your second time on the show. Thank you.
No.
And I hope there will be a third soon enough.
Yeah, definitely. I do have a novel coming out next year.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So that's a date. Just let me know the publication date. We'll work something out.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on again.
Yeah. So this has been a conversation and a reading with A.T. Sayre, Sayre. Ask for it by name.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.